They built 96 homes on land that didn't even belong to them. Let that sink in. Almost 100 families moving into houses, mowing lawns, barbecuing in backyards, all while living on top of someone else's inheritance. And the real kicker, the rightful owner didn't just sit back and take it. She let the HOA walk right into a trap, and when it finally snapped shut, it cost them millions. This isn't just a story about property lines or real estate paperwork. This is a story about greed, about power, about what happens when a black woman in Georgia refuses to let her family's history be erased. By the time this fight was over, the homeowners association, usually the one bullying everyone else, found themselves scrambling, desperate, and cornered. And Angela, she came out on top. But before we get there, you need to understand the layers, because this isn't just one person's story. It's part of a much bigger picture, one that shows how easily land can be stolen, how quickly power can be abused, and how one determined woman flipped the script. Angela Johnson grew up running through tall grass, chasing her cousins across fields her father called our 40 acres of Georgia soil, dotted with pecan trees, patches of wildflowers, and the remains of an old wooden barn that her grandfather had built with his bare hands. For her family, this wasn't just property. It was proof. Proof that despite everything Jim Crow, redlining, economic hardship, they still had something of their own, something no one could take away. At least that's what she thought. When Angela's parents passed away, the land legally became hers. She didn't live on it full-time, but she kept the taxes paid, the records up to date, and the deed tucked safely in her files. That land was her inheritance, her legacy. So you can imagine her shock when, one warm spring afternoon, she drove out to see it and found an entire neighborhood standing where her childhood memories used to be. Angela parked her car at the edge of the property and just stared. Asphalt roads cut across the fields. Sidewalks ran in neat little lines. Children's bikes leaned against garage doors. Nearly 100 homes, all brand new, sat on the land her parents had left her. Her first thought, she had made a mistake. Maybe she turned down the wrong road. Maybe her memory had blurred. But when she checked the GPS, her chest tightened. She was standing right where she was supposed to be. This was her land, and someone had built 96 homes on it without ever asking her. Angela stormed down to the county office. She wanted answers. She wanted to see the permits, the deeds, the surveys. And when the clerk pulled out the records, her hands started shaking. There it was in black and white, owner Angela Johnson. She hadn't sold the land. She hadn't signed it away. She hadn't leased it, which meant every slab of concrete, every mailbox, every front porch was sitting smack in the middle of her inheritance. But here's the part that will make your blood boil. When Angela confronted the HOA president, the man who oversaw the shiny new neighborhood, he didn't apologize. He didn't panic. He looked her in the eye and said, "Well, people live here now. You can't just kick them out." Think about that arrogance. Think about how bold you have to be to steal land, build on it, and then tell the rightful owner it's too late to do anything about it. Now let's pause, because to understand why this is so infuriating, you need to know how HOAs usually work. Homeowners associations were supposed to make neighborhoods look nice. They set rules: how tall your grass can be, what color your shutters are, whether you can park your truck in the driveway. But here's the ugly truth. HOAs have teeth. They can fine you, sue you, even foreclose on your home. And all of this power sits in the hands of neighbors, not trained officials, not elected leaders, just regular people who suddenly get to play sheriff. And when people get a taste of power, they abuse it. In Georgia alone, there have been nightmare stories. A woman fined $2,800 for moving her own fence a few feet. A man blindsided with a $10,150 bill. No explanation, just a demand to pay or risk losing his house. Families threatened with foreclosure because their trash can sat in the wrong spot for a single day. So when Angela realized an HOA had built 96 homes on her land, she knew exactly what kind of enemy she was dealing with. Angela could have screamed, she could have broken down, but instead she played it cool. She called a lawyer. Together they combed through the records, and the verdict was clear. Angela owned every inch of that land, which meant she technically owned every home sitting on top of it too. The lawyer explained something wild. If Angela wanted, she could evict everyone. The families, the kids, the retirees who thought they'd found their dream homes. Every single one of them. And this is where most people would have backed down. Who wants to be the villain in front of 100 families? Who wants the news cameras calling you heartless? The HOA was betting Angela would fold under the pressure. But Angela didn't. Instead, she set a trap. She knew the law was on her side. She also knew the HOA couldn't just sweep this under the rug. The residents had no idea they were living on stolen land, but the HOA board, the developer, they knew. Angela told her lawyer, "I don't want to kick anyone out, but I want them to know I could. I want them to feel the weight of it." So she let the HOA sweat. She made it clear that she could pull the rug out from under them any day. And while they panicked, while residents started whispering and wondering, Angela waited. Because when people are desperate, they pay. Now, let me step back for a second, because this fight didn't happen in a vacuum. Across the U.S., black families have been losing land for generations. Sometimes it's through shady tax sales. Sometimes it's developers pressuring families into selling cheap. Sometimes it's highways bulldozed straight through black neighborhoods. In fact, from 1910 to today, black land ownership dropped from 16 million acres to less than 3 million. That's not an accident. That's systemic theft. So when Angela stood her ground, it wasn't just personal. It was historical. She was carrying the weight of generations, people who had lost everything because they didn't have the resources or the knowledge to fight back. This time it was different. The HOA tried to play hardball. They offered her pennies. They begged her to think about the children. They tried guilt, they tried pressure, they tried delay tactics. But Angela never flinched. She knew that if this went to court, the HOA would lose, badly, and not just lose money, lose face. The headlines would be brutal. HOA builds neighborhood on stolen land. The lawsuits from homeowners would rain down. The developer's reputation would crumble. So the longer Angela held out, the more the HOA squirmed. Weeks turned into months. Rumors spread through the neighborhood. Some families packed up, afraid of what might happen. Others grew angry at the HOA, realizing they'd been lied to. And finally, the HOA cracked. Angela's lawyer slid the agreement across the table. The HOA would pay, not thousands, not hundreds of thousands, but millions, enough to honor her parents' legacy, enough to change her life. Angela signed. The trap had snapped shut. But here, where it gets even better, Angela didn't just take the money and disappear. She reinvested it. She started scholarships in her parents' names. She helped black-owned businesses in her community. She made sure her family's land, even though it was gone, would keep building something bigger. And the HOA, they limped away, weaker, humiliated, and forever marked by the fact that they got caught trying to play a game they couldn't win. To really drive this home, let's look at a few more HOA nightmares, because Angela's story might sound extreme, but it's not isolated. In Texas, a veteran came home from deployment only to find his HOA had foreclosed on his house because of unpaid dues he didn't even know about. In Florida, a woman was fined $100 a day because her grass grew too tall while she was recovering from surgery. The fines snowballed until she owed tens of thousands. In Georgia, one man was told he had to remove a small shed from his backyard, a shed that was perfectly legal under county rules, simply because the HOA didn't like how it looked. These aren't accidents, they're patterns. Patterns of abuse, of control, of people with clipboards and bylaws thinking they can bulldoze lives. And Angela proved something important. Those patterns can be broken. Angela's fight wasn't just about land. It was about dignity, about history, about standing up when everyone expects you to bow down. She could have been another name in a long list of families who lost everything. But instead, she turned the tables. She showed that sometimes, when people think they've taken everything from you, they've really just walked straight into your trap. But what happened after the trap snapped shut? What happened after Angela walked away with the settlement, while the HOA licked its wounds? That's where the story gets even more interesting. When the ink dried on the agreement, Angela thought the hardest part was over. She finally had justice. She had millions in her account, security for her future, and the satisfaction of knowing the HOA had been humbled. But in Georgia, news travels fast, and Angela's story wasn't just whispered in courtrooms or passed between lawyers. It hit the local paper, then it spread to TV news, then online. Suddenly, Angela was everywhere. Black woman beats HOA. Homeowners trapped in neighborhood built on stolen land. David defeats Goliath in property rights showdown. She didn't ask to be a symbol, but whether she liked it or not, that's exactly what she became. The reactions were split. Some people called her a hero. Neighbors stopped her at the grocery store, shaking her hand, saying, "You did it for all of us. You stood up to the machine." Others weren't so kind. Anonymous letters slipped under her door. Angry posts online accusing her of being selfish or greedy, blaming her for making families feel unsafe in their own homes. Angela couldn't walk into town without feeling eyes on her back, some admiring, some accusing. But Angela, she had thicker skin now. She told herself, "They weren't in that courtroom, they didn't live what I lived. I know the truth." While Angela rebuilt her life, the HOA scrambled to keep theirs from falling apart. Residents demanded answers. Lawsuits piled up, not just from Angela, but from homeowners who realized they'd been duped into buying houses on stolen land. The developer's name was dragged through the mud. In one explosive board meeting, captured on a shaky iPhone video that went viral, residents shouted down the HOA president. "You lied to us. You said everything was legal. We trusted you." The HOA had been the enforcer, the ruler, the bully. Now it was fractured, exposed, weak. And Angela, she watched it all unfold from the sidelines. But here, where the story takes a turn, Angela started getting calls, not from lawyers, not from journalists, but from families across the South. A woman in Alabama, whose grandmother's land had been seized for a golf course. A man in North Carolina, fighting an HOA over farmland that had been in his family for generations. A church in Mississippi that lost its lot because of unpaid HOA fines. They saw Angela as proof that the system could be beaten. They begged her for advice. They asked her to speak at rallies. They wanted her voice. Angela realized her fight wasn't over. In fact, it had only just begun. But let's not sugarcoat it. Victory came with scars. Angela had nightmares about losing the case. She woke up in cold sweats, reliving the moment she first saw those houses on her land. She also carried guilt. She never wanted to hurt the families living there. They weren't the enemy. They were pawns in a bigger game. But she couldn't stop wondering what happened to them when the truth came out. Did they stay? Did they leave? Did they resent her? Money could fix a lot of things, but it couldn't erase the weight of history, the stress of the battle, or the loneliness of being the one who stood up while everyone else stayed quiet. Angela could have disappeared. She could have retired quietly, bought a new home, and lived off the settlement. But something in her refused to rest. She started attending community meetings. She spoke at local colleges about property rights. She launched a nonprofit, Legacy Keepers, dedicated to helping families protect their land from predatory developers and overreaching HOAs. For the first time in her life, Angela felt like her fight had a purpose beyond herself. Of course, not everyone liked Angela's new role. Developers whispered her name like a curse. HOA lobbyists painted her as dangerous and radical. Some even accused her of inspiring homeowners to resist reasonable HOA rules. One lobbyist was quoted in a newspaper saying, "If more people follow Angela Johnson's example, neighborhoods across the South could collapse." To Angela, that wasn't an insult. That was a badge of honor. But the pressure was real. Anonymous threats escalated. Lawyers warned her that powerful groups were watching, waiting, ready to pounce if she slipped. The battle wasn't over. It had just moved to a bigger stage. Still, Angela's story sparked something no HOA lobbyists could stop. Families started digging up old deeds, checking property records, questioning shady deals. Local news outlets began investigating HOA abuses. Politicians, smelling votes, introduced bills to rein in HOA power. One Georgia state senator even mentioned Angela by name in a floor speech. "This woman fought for her land and won. How many others are losing theirs in silence? We need reform, and we need it now." Angela sat in the gallery that day, her heart pounding. She wasn't just a survivor anymore. She was a movement. But through all the noise, Angela stayed grounded. She planted a garden in her backyard, the same vegetables her father used to grow on the land. She taught her nieces and nephews about deeds, titles, and taxes, things her parents never had the chance to explain. She told them, "This is how they steal from us, but this is also how we fight back." For Angela, the biggest victory wasn't the money. It was knowing that her family, and maybe thousands of others, would never be caught off guard the way she was. Looking back, Angela often thought about that first day standing in front of 96 homes on land that was supposed to be hers. The shock, the rage, the helplessness. Now when she thought about it, she felt something else, pride. Her parents' land might have been built over, paved, and sold, but their legacy wasn't gone. She had turned it into something indestructible, something no one could bulldoze. Angela's story proves something powerful. Sometimes the system sets a trap for you, but if you're smart, if you're patient, if you know your history, you can flip it. You can make the trap snap back on the people who built it. And Angela, she didn't just win her battle, she lit a fire. Because once people saw that the HOA giant could bleed, they realized it could be beaten. Angela's story isn't over, and neither are the fights happening in neighborhoods across America. If you believe in standing up for what's right, in protecting what's yours, and in leaving behind a legacy that no one can erase, hit that subscribe button. Because there are more stories coming, and you don't want to miss them.